So thank you again, Judge Harris, for joining me on this important interview, which I think a lot of leaders, emerging leaders, aspiring leaders will be able to leverage, and they'll gain a lot of wisdom from your vast experience in the legal field as an educator, as an advocate, as a community leader. And you've done so much. Even you were a probation officer at one point. So you've done so much work, and thank you for all the work that you continue to do. I did want to start off by sharing with you some of the comments from the LinkedIn posts. I think you saw it, and the response is overwhelming. I was just so impressed by what all these people had to say about you as a judge. And having interned with you, I was a judicial clerk for you for one summer. This was my first year of law school. I had the opportunity to see you work, and I remember trying to impress you as a first year law student. And of course, I didn't know what the heck I was talking about, but you listened to me. So he says he is leadership in action. I first met him when he volunteered his time helping Black lawyer school graduates prepare for the bar exam 25 years ago. Another person kind of talks about a motion that you decided, and this is Commonwealth versus Humberton, or yes, you
Umberto H. Yes.
yeah, so you recognize it, and he says that you decided how important it was to dismiss this delinquency complaint for want of probable cause before an arraignment, and you spared a juvenile from having a record. And my comment there was that, this was a great tribute to you, but you applied the rule of law with the spirit of law in mind, always looking forward, balancing justice and accountability. So you remember that decision, it sounds like, very
One
well.
of the most important decisions that we had in the juvenile court because it gave us the opportunity to protect children. See, once you get arraigned, you have that footprint for the rest of your life.
Mm,
And keeping that footprint out of your life, that arraignment, is so important.
mm,
We have kids, 95% of the kids who get arrested for school offenses never get prosecuted, but
mm,
it's on their record.
mm,
Kids get arrested for possession of marijuana or possession with intent. It's what they like to do. Then they can't go into the service.
mm,
You can't go into service. You won't be a police officer or a fireman because
mm.
they get preference.
Yes.
That's why the police department and the fire department is turning white again because they don't arrest white kids
Mm,
for that. But Black inner city kids were constantly being arrested for crimes that other folks, got a ticket for. This
mm,
young man in Umberto H should have been given a $50 ticket, but they wanted to charge him with possession with intent,
mm,
which isn't covered by the ticket, and so he would have had a record.
mm.
So it was important, to protect him because he was a 15-year-old kid and they were getting ready to destroy the rest of his life.
And here you're really talking about the system at different stages, from law enforcement to the judicial system to the military to job market. It just one decision can impact a youth's life forever. And
Forever.
forever, yeah. And depending on their color or background or socioeconomic status, it could just be, a slap on the wrist, or it could mean, low income situation, or low paying jobs, or not getting access to higher education or different other opportunities. So you see that even in those types of decisions, and I think that's really important.
It's one of those things that we try to tell judges about. When we met as a group of judges for our conference, juvenile court, one of the judges present the important cases of the year.
Mm,
He was a former prosecutor, and he said, I said, that's not our job. That's, because in the past, the DA and the clerk made the decision whether to arraign someone, not judges. Once
mm,
it was arraigned, it belonged to the judge.
mm,
But the judge said, I was against this. I said, that's not our job. He said, but I used it last week. I
mm,
did this last week, and we got to protect a child in my court. He said, what a wonderful tool.
mm,
And, I still speak at a number of the law schools around, and that's one of the cases that they talk about every year in there because it is a tool that we get to use to protect children. And it's important. So many kids come into our courts one time in their life, but that one time can really, really make a difference in your life. I lost a kid one time and I was feeling really down.
mm,
I got an email from a young lady and she said, you won't remember me, but 11 years ago, something like that, maybe 13 years ago, I appeared in front of you. I
mm,
was a 16-year-old angry young woman who had been arrested for shoplifting and whose parents were going through an ugly divorce. She said, but I had also been accepted to Harvard.
mm,
And I thought, now I won't be able to go because I'm going to have a criminal record.
mm.
He said, but you didn't let them arraign me.
Wow.
She said, I want to let you know I graduated from Harvard. I got my law degree from Stanford.
Wow.
And I'm practicing with the Three Strikes program in California. She
Wow.
said, I want to let you know that I'm paying it forward. Well, there's many times that you feel that you haven't done anything, that why am I here? When you can't save a young man who was shot to death because we couldn't do anything to keep him safe. And I was really depressed. And I understand that it was depression now. But that letter made such a difference in my life. It gave me the knowledge that I had done something for somebody. And so often that's all we need.
Mm,
Somebody to acknowledge that you made a difference. I was one of those kids who you would not call a good student growing up.
yeah.
My mother had to come to come to school 2 or 3 times a week
Yeah.
for my behavior. 7 kids, I'm the one she had to come to school about.
Mm,
My vice principal told me I would never graduate from the 8th grade,
wow.
you know, and she kicked me out of my 8th grade graduation. My
Mm,
mother got me back in, but she kicked me out. And it's one of those things that stays with you your whole life. It sort of helps shape who you are
mm,
because you can see the damage that words can do.
mm,
You can see the damage that an educator can do who is not empathetic towards your life situation.
mm,
And I wasn't a bad kid. I just questioned things,
mm,
and challenged things. Why are we being punished when we didn't do anything? That kind of thing. But it got me in lots of trouble.
mm,
But I had mentors who didn't let me fail.
mm.
And just like this young lady saying she's paying it forward, I believe that's been my life mission, to pay it forward from those folks who didn't allow me to fail. I tried to be a high school dropout.
Yeah. You tried to be, you attempted to be?
Oh, I was dropping out, but I was a musician.
Yeah.
We played the clubs on the south side of Chicago, a number of clubs. So I would sneak into school to go to band practice, even though I was dropping out of high school. I wanted to be a truck driver
Mm-hmm.
because they made enough money to move out the project.
I see. And so
Yeah.
you grew up in Chicago,
Yes,
inner city Chicago.
yes,
Yeah. So you're sharing really your life story
yeah,
at
because it's
point.
who I am.
Yeah, and so important. One of the things I talk about in the leadership series, and I talk about just in general, that you have to understand your life story and how it fuels your passion to address certain issues. And you talked about, the words that you heard from your eighth grade teacher that essentially you would not amount to much, and that was not leading with empathy, but you recognize that. At what point did you recognize, okay, I'm not going to let this one person determine what my future is going to look like?
I don't think as a child, I never made that conscious decision.
Hmm.
I didn't care for the vice principal very much. She loved my older brother and couldn't stand me.
Mm.
But when I tried to drop out of high school, the assistant principal in my high school, Miss Dr. Henry Spring,
Mm.
caught me sneaking into school.
Mm.
And Leslie, I hear you're dropping out of school. And I said, that's just all I could get out. Because he grabbed me, picked me up against the wall, and told me what he would do to me if I missed another day of school.
Hmm.
Henry Springs did not say things that he didn't mean.
Yeah.
So I didn't miss another day of school. So I was at the school when the colleges came recruiting.
Mm.
And you know, I was a decent student. I was in the top 20 of my class, top 10%. Um, could have been a better student, I know that, but I made it through and got to go to college because other people saw more in me than I saw in myself.
Mm.
Truck drivers made enough money to move out of the project. And that was my goal, to get out of the projects. I
Mm.
didn't know about an education. Went to Northwestern for undergrad.
Mm.
I was going to get a diploma
Mm.
because I didn't know what a BA or a BS or a master's or a doc. I didn't know those things. I knew what a doctorate was because I worked with some folks at the University of Chicago doing a summer program, and they were doctors, but none of them looked like me.
Mm.
You know, didn't know any lawyers, so it never crossed my mind to be a lawyer.
Mm.
But I had a history teacher. His name was Sterling Stuckey. He was actually my older brother's teacher, and I was still in grade school. He was in high school. We picketed the Chicago Board of Education
Mm.
for not teaching what was then Negro history. This was like in 1961 or so, before I graduated from grade school.
Mm.
And that's when I became active, Sterling Stuckey. I got to high school, I was a part of a group called the Student Advocates of Negro History, pronounced SAN, SANH, SAN. And we taught history by doing some plays and poetry back in the early 60s.
Mm.
And I became interested. So when Martin Luther King came to Chicago, of course, I went on a march with him to a place called South Dearborn, Illinois.
Mm.
Frightening, frightening experience.
Wow.
But I understood the power of Martin Luther King.
Mm.
People holding hands and singing, "We shall overcome." Even though you were afraid, you didn't feel like you had to run. So I always tell people I'm a child of the 60s. Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, they helped create my view of the world. And I owe it to so many people who took the time to help a little colored boy from the south side of Chicago survive. You
So
know,
you're making history, you've lived history, you've experienced history, and I think in ways that many people have not. And given all that we're going through, I mean, since 2020, and I think when the year started, everyone's like 2020 vision is going to be amazing. And I think we actually got a lot of clarity. We see much more clearly now than we ever have in terms of where we are with systemic racism, where we are in terms of justice and equality. And I think leaders have a critical role in kind of setting the bar higher and empowering people to think about each other differently, engage each other differently, and bring people in the fold, making space for them. As someone commented in the LinkedIn post, they said you make space for other people, and it sounds like the experiences you've had a couple of leaders who've made space for you, who showed you that you can be better, that you can do better, but you needed a model to show you that way forward.
yes,
Yeah.
My older brother bought a house because our band director owned a home,
Mm,
and we wanted to be like him. He brought us out to his house. We got to work around his house and make money on the weekends. First time I ever found out what tuck pointing was, repairing the bricks on his house,
mm,
cutting grass. And I mean, you didn't do those things in the projects. But Mr. Whitworth had a house, and we all wanted to be like him, or like Mr. Stuckey, folks who were somebody. When I was getting ready to go off to Northwestern, I told my uncle, I said, Uncle L, I'm going to Northwestern. He said, Oh, I went to Northwestern. I said, What? I said, If you went to Northwestern, why are you a janitor? He said, Well, you have to understand. When I went, I couldn't live on campus. I commuted. It was in the early 40s. He said, I got my degree, and I don't know, I think he said electrical engineering, but I don't remember. But he said there were no job for a Black man with the degree. He said, so I took the best job I could get. And he said, that's as a janitor maintenance man. But he always had a book stuck in his back pocket. My father always had a book stuck in his back pocket, a paperback book. And so I developed a love for reading early. When I got to high school, I had read most of the books we had to read in high school, all except Moby Dick. But so many of the books we had to read, I had read. And it's because people around me read.
mm,
My aunts all read. My father had a sixth grade education. But my first summer, we went to a summer program before we started college. And they had a class called functions. It was a math class, which I could not understand. I had trigonometry and calculus and all that stuff. But I said, I'm going to fail this class. And I took the book home with me one weekend, and I told my dad, I'm not going to pass this class. He said, well, this was on a Friday night. He said, let me see the book. And he took it. On Sunday afternoon, when I was going to go back to school, he said, son, come here and let me explain this to you. And he explained it in a way that made sense to me.
mm,
I passed that class,
mm,
with his sixth grade education. So I understood. My father was always the boss wherever he worked. He was a glassman, a
yeah,
glazer, put in windows. He was the boss. He worked at a warehouse. He immediately became the boss. All of my brothers, wherever they were, my older brother was a police chief. He was a police sergeant and eventually became a police chief. My two younger brothers were in gangs.
mm.
They couldn't be in the same gang because each of them had to be the boss.
Okay. Wow.
You know, and I think that was taught to us. I can't be late for things because of my parents.
Mm,
You don't be late. You might have to wait when you get there, but it
mm,
won't be because you're late.
yeah.
And if you were with me over that summer, you you know.
Oh no, I listen, I was there and I was there early, not on time. I didn't miss a day.
I can't stand lateness, and
Yeah.
I understand what that means. They were teaching me like skill.
Hmm.
Now, I also learned that you don't have to be in front to
Yes.
be a leader.
Yeah.
And there have been many times when somebody wanted me to become the president or the chairman of a group that I'm in. And I said, no, this young person or this person should be the chairman, and I'll work with them. Because, well, I learned that when I was in law school.
Mm,
See, I was out of graduate school 10 years before I went back to go to law school. And while I was in law school, we had to have someone who's going to be the chairperson of the admissions committee. Another young lady wanted it, but it was given to me.
mm,
And I didn't realize how much it meant to her. It didn't mean any, I would never put on my resume things that I did like that in school because my resume was already too long.
yeah.
I was trying to find ways to shorten it. And for her, coming straight out of undergrad to law school, she needed things to put on her resume.
Mm,
And I will never forget that because I took that opportunity. Where she's done well, she's a judge, but I understand that Um, I could have done the same work working with her. Being the chairperson does not mean that you have to do all the work or do all the leading. And
Mhm.
that, I worked for a consulting firm for a few minutes. And one of the books they gave me to read had a story about whose monkey is it? Monkey on your back, whose burden is it? And that lesson has stayed with me. You don't have to carry other people's burden.
Yes.
You have enough burdens in your own life. One of the judges, other Black judge that worked with me, um, we all carry a burden when you work in juvenile court.
Mm.
It's not a good place for a crybaby, which I am, you know, because
Uh,
you will cry a lot in juvenile court, you
it's
know.
I remember those some of those cases. A few of them really stuck with me, and I
Yeah,
think because of that, I decided that okay, so juvenile law is really not for me because I had a particular saying um, when we would sit together after a hearing or a session, we would sit together, you and the other justices, and ask our opinions and our thoughts and our analysis on the case. And one of the first things I would say is, I want to take them out back and shoot them. I was referring to the people. I don't think you remember that, and this will not be in anything, but I don't I actually would say that a lot because I'm like I don't know how parents and adults would do certain things to their own children.
yes,
And it was just so I don't know how I mean you've been on the bench what 19 20 years or
over
more.
20 years, yeah.
So I just how do you process all that you see, all that you hear, all that you know, having sat on the bench for 20 years in juvenile court? Like how do you process that? How do you stay healthy as a leader?
When I would come home, I wouldn't know, I'd come in the house and go right back out, go in the yard and work for an hour, a couple of hours, letting go of what happened in court.
Mm,
Um, you can't discuss your cases outside of court, um, but you can talk about your feelings. And I have a very supportive wife. We'll be married 45 years this year.
mm,
But we've been together 49 years. Um, in May, we'd be 49 years there because we dated 4 years before we got married. But she's been supportive. Now, she was a school teacher. We have 3 kids. One works in the health field. My 2 sons are both teachers, teach high school. And I see the difference they make,
mm,
you know. And I think they learned that they did a film once called Raising Compassionate Men.
mm,
Soledad O'Brien was one of the folks they focused on. There were 3 people: Soledad O'Brien, raising her son, my mother raising me, and
mm,
another mother raising another child. You know, and they had originally wanted to do my wife, not my baby sister. She's the one that they came to, and she said you should do my brother.
mm.
But she said I was just going to be a crybaby judge, a lawyer who never made any money. And she was right. you know, um, but they talked about having the ability to have empathy. And I
Yeah,
know I got that from my mother. You
yeah.
know, I never kissed my father till I was an adult.
Mm,
Men didn't do that in my generation. You know, my kids hug me and kiss me on the cheek all the time. But that was not our experience growing up. And you didn't talk about your pain. But as an adult, see, I didn't understand that I was a trauma survivor growing up. I got stabbed twice, cut once, shot at a few times, you
wow.
know. But that was just growing up. You never think about it. But I realized that if I had found this one guy, and I say his name, Thunder, who tried to rob me one time, I never forgave that. And the guy who cut me the first time I got injured cut me, and I had never done anything to him.
Mm,
If I had found either one of them, my life would have been very different
mm,
because I would have gone to jail
mm-hmm.
because I was that angry and walking around with that for years. And I was at a conference for lawyers and all, and they started talking about trauma and how we need to let trauma go and get help if we can't do it, you know. And it made me open my eyes and realize that I was a trauma survivor who saw the world through that trauma,
Wow.
you know, being hit upside the head by the police as a child when you haven't done anything, you know. We always ran when the police came, whether we were doing anything or not, because
Because
we didn't
you got-
have,
Yeah.
yeah, we didn't have positive interactions with the police. You know, we knew where to run to because there were these fences that we could almost jump over and the police had to climb over. So they would fall further and further behind us, you know. But it was, you know, knowing and understanding that you were a trauma survivor, you recognized it in other people.
Mm,
So many of the kids who came in front of me in court were trauma survivors or were living in trauma. And we always see them as the perpetrator when so often they were the victim, you know. And I think that's what leaders have to understand, that not everyone has been as blessed as you have been.
yes.
Somebody asked me if I wrote a book, what I would call it. And I said, I would call it a blessed life because
Mm.
I believe I've been blessed. You know, I'll be 73 in 2 months. Um, that wasn't promised in my neighborhood.
I thought you were gonna say 63. You look good.
Well,
You look
thank
good.
you. But,
You're
you
welcome.
know, so many of my friends and cousins and two of my brothers are gone. You know, we were not supposed to make 60 and 70 years old.
Mm,
My older brother is turning 75 this month. He's the patriarch of our family. He's the oldest living person in our family, you
mm,
know. And I see other folks with 90 and 100-year-old parents and grandparents. And I understand where I came from. And so, but I always want to do is to make life a little bit easier for those coming behind.
mhm,
I didn't want my kids to have to do the things that I had to do. So my wife and I made sure we paid for their college, at least undergrad, and helped them with graduate school,
mhm.
you know, and because I know how I struggled to repay those loans. But if you don't repay them, you pay for it.
Yes.
And so, you know, I don't know if you remember Judge Miles at the court. Well, we worked together. She was another Black judge in the juvenile court. And I could see her getting headaches and all. And it wasn't from the kids, and it was fighting the system,
Mm,
you know, being overlooked for promotion or fighting um, the way we were going to interpret the law. And we had to have a long talk. And I told her, you can't fight every fight that comes your way. And I understand that. There are fights that you don't have a choice. You've got to fight. There are fights that you could fight, but it won't make a difference.
mm.
And then there are fights that you just won't win. And we only have so much energy. And if you're fighting fights that you can't win, you're wasting energy.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but most of the time. There are those times when you have to fight a fight you know you're going to lose simply for the principle.
For the principal and to move the progress forward, right? So
I
someone
spoke to,
else can continue
I
that.
spoke to Judge Lewis the other day, this
Yeah.
past week.
Mm,
Judge Lewis and I were very different types of judges. He was a judge before I got there, and he was a judge after I left, you know. But he told me he was blessed to have had me as a co-worker
yeah.
because it changed how he saw the world.
Hmm.
It made him understand the lives of some of the young people that came in front of us.
Mm,
And that touched me to my heart. You know, he's retired now, you know, because he was a callback judge for a while, but, you know, he'd be 80 years old um, this month or next month, and it was time to let it go. But I understand the difference that being in the court makes.
Mm,
I talk with young people all the time who say, well, you shouldn't be a part of the system. Well, if we're not a part of the system, we'll always be victims of the system.
yeah, exactly.
So I tell them, I need you to go into corporate America.
Hmm.
I need you to become prosecutors, not just defense attorneys, but prosecutors who see the humanity in the person who's being charged with the crime.
Mm,
If we don't see the humanity in the people around us, then we lose our own humanity.
mm,
We become robots. And I watch judges who were robots, who never saw the person in front of them. And that's one of the hardest things to fight, seeing the difference in every person that walked into your courtroom.
mm,
That for you, this was just the same as the case you had last week.
mhm.
But for them, it was the most important thing in their lives at that time.
So you talk a lot about leading with empathy, and being empathetic is really a leadership attribute, a very important attribute
If
to
you
have
want to be an effective leader,
if you want to be an effective leader. Thank you for adding that. So how do you become an empathetic leader? I mean, you talked about your story, which certainly um, help you to see things differently. You have a unique perspective. You bring that with you. Your life story has really impacted you tremendously and has helped you to maybe correct some wrongs, open up doors of opportunity for others. But how do you increase your level of empathy as a leader, and what would you share with those who are not as empathetic and who are not that self-aware?
somebody said, what's the old term? Be careful who you step on while you're going up, because they might be your boss one day.
Mhm.
Well, that's been my life experience. People who hurt me end up working for me or applying to a position where I had the final say,
Yeah, yeah.
and I learned a long time ago to forgive. When I started dealing with my own trauma, one of the things you have to do is forgive. I started working with restorative justice. And I wish we had had it when I was growing up,
Mm,
that someone would have worked with us to help the person who was the perpetrator of harm understand what they were doing to the person they were harming. Because that's the same thing when you're a leader. Don't ask of others what you wouldn't ask of yourself.
yeah.
And understand that sometimes you have the experience to be able to do something that the younger person in front of you haven't had,
Hmm.
and don't understand, you know, um, things that you understand or that you can do without thinking about it. They have to work at it,
Hmm.
and if you want to be a real leader, you want to pull the people who are behind you because they push you further up,
Mm,
you know, and you never know which one of them. It's one of the things I always said about the kids coming in front of me. That person might marry one of my children
yeah.
or be the father or mother of one of my or of a child that marries one of my grandchildren.
Hmm.
So I want to make life as supportive and forgiving for them as I would for my own.
Mm,
You don't know who these kids are going to be. I've met so many men who have been in prison and come out and done wonderful things.
mm,
Working with the woman now who was in and out of prison. She didn't forget that. She didn't forget the women who she left behind.
mm,
She's creating a space for them. And I think that's what our job is in life. Now, I go to church. I'm very active in my church, but I respect all religions
yeah.
because I believe all religions teach basically the same thing,
Hmm.
that we have to care about others.
Yeah.
And I don't profess to be overly religious. but I believe in helping people. I believe that heaven and hell is how people think about you when you're gone,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of people who are going to be in hell because of how they treated people,
Mm.
and I don't want to be one of them. I want to treat people with respect. And I think that's what a good leader does. But
And
that's also what a good follower does.
and I think the point about being a good leader is just your point about forgiveness is so important, because I think when leaders have unresolved issues and they're not forgiving and always forgiving and letting go, they hold on to whatever that is and they pass it on. And I loved what you said about making sure that how you engage people, you're really focused forward on however that person may impact someone else's life,
You
right?
have to be,
Yeah,
because it might be your life
yeah,
that they impact. I've met folks who come in, law students who are on the bench now, and you never know when you're going to go into court, because you're not always guilty when you walk into court. You don't have to have done anything to end up in court. And I want someone there who's empathetic. But I also want the head of Microsoft to be empathetic. I
yes.
want the head of, what was it? They said the black jelly bean stuck at the bottom of the jar. That was one of the big
Wow.
companies. Talked about black folks not being able to move up in their company.
Wow.
You know, I always say to young black people, if you had been at that table, maybe that conversation would have been different.
A different
But
perspective.
yes, you could have. Um, I know that I had an impact on other judges, because some of them, I'm working with them now. I had a meeting just a little while ago with about 10 judges that we're trying to make a difference after we retired. All of us are retired judges. But we understand the shortcomings of the court, and we want to still make a difference. We have to redefine how the court interacts with people. That's
Mm.
why I love my DA, the new DA we have in Suffolk County,
A
Rachel
friend,
Rollo.
a friend, and she's also a client. So I absolutely love her. Yeah.
Yeah,
Power. Yeah.
because she's looking to do something different.
Yeah.
That just because when I was the head of the juvenile division of the DA's office, but I tried to make the DAs who work with me understand is just because you get a conviction doesn't mean you have to ask for a commitment,
Yeah.
because not every conviction deserves commitment.
Mm.
Hold someone responsible, sure, but you don't throw away their life.
Mm.
And so often when somebody comes in front of you in court and you hold them on bail, you've changed their lives forever,
Yeah.
especially with adults, because they lose their job. Quite often they're a parent or a spouse who has other people relying on them, and you're taking them out of the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone, but a lot of folks who came into our courts
Mm-hmm.
were in that position. So I said in the adult court and the juvenile court when I first started, because we were just creating a statewide juvenile court.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't have a juvenile court in every court. And they were bringing on 21 new judges. And so I guess,
My
I have
apologies. I'm gonna grab some water. Give me one.
thing here. I forgot mine. Yeah.
So before I'll let you finish your thought, and then I wanna ask you to share a little bit more about your experience marching with Dr. Martin Luther King, and that the statement that he made, that you can be afraid, but you don't have to run. So I'll let you finish your thoughts
Well,
on.
I don't remember what it was that quick. So,
Okay.
but one of the things I remember, we went to a place called South Deering, Illinois.
Mhm.
It was south of Chicago. over by the border of Indiana. And it was mostly folks worked in the steel mill. And it was an all white community built to be all white. Um, and Dr. King, this had to be like in 1965 or so, was doing a march there and on the west side of Chicago, southwest side. I went with him to South Deering. My younger brother went with the other group. And I had never thought about being nonviolent. I mean, mess with me, I fought back. I mean, it was just, but I understood when I went on this march that I was making a commitment not to do that, that this was not about me. And so we got there. And one of the things I remember is this nun being hit by a brick and them wanting to take her out of the march and her saying, no, that you're not taking me out of this march, that I'm going to stay and finish this. And all I could think about was how brave she was. If I gotten hit, I'd have looked for the first opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But I was a kid. I was 16 years old, maybe, and but I understood her commitment. This white nun willing to be hit and bleeding, and they stopped the bleeding, but she wasn't going to leave. She was going to finish this, and it gave me the strength to finish. And I remember when we got back into the city and we were all gathered, and at least a lot of us were still gathered, and they got in that circle and they crossed their arms and held hands and saying, "We shall overcome," how emotionally uplifting that was.
Mm-hmm.
I've said to my kids and to other young people that I hope that one day they can be a part of something that made them feel the way I felt, being a part of that march and seeing the strength of people, seeing the people who could walk into the lion's den, as they say, and sing. And that's not an easy thing to do because I've seen it not just on a march, but in my work experience.
Mm-hmm.
People who were less qualified than me getting
Yeah.
positions over me. I've left a number of jobs and took pay cuts to leave because I didn't feel justice was being done.
Yeah.
But I've never regretted it um, because every job I took after that, even though they started me out paying me less, they got a pay raise retroactive to my first day of work.
Oh, good.
Happened to be a couple of times, so I got raises and never lost a penny, but was willing to take the pay cut because I felt abused
Yeah.
and overlooked, and that's a real feeling that you have to deal with when you're working in the system,
Yes.
that you're not always going to be able to um, get your due.
I was doing a training, game changing leadership, and you're one of the leaders that I spoke about. One of the questions was, what do you do when others are threatened by your skill, by your ability? And one of the answers that I gave this participant was sometimes you do it, you contribute where you can, but sometimes you have to leave because you want to go where you're being valued. And I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and I love what you were sharing about you mentoring other judges and helping them to navigate the system that they're also trying to change. But one of the things I talk about is that diversity without inclusion is essentially window dressing. You have all of these people at the table, but if they are not listened to, engage, if they are not being brought into the fold and able to participate in certain decisions, then essentially you have them there, but they're just a nice trophy on the shelf somewhere that you bring out and tell everybody, look what I have. To be able to engage talent at all levels, regardless of their color, background, or creed, or whatever, is critical. I think it's helpful for us to focus on that as a country. And so you talked about that in that mentorship
Well,
example.
one of the things that I remember is I didn't particularly have an ambition to be a judge. Um, One of my role models as a lawyer, a guy named Jay Carney, um, when they were expanding the juvenile court, he was the chairperson of the committee that was going to be hiring or recommending um, lawyers to be judges. And he asked me if I would apply. And I said, no. I said, first off, the recommendations is that you have to be a lawyer for 10 years at least before you apply for a judgeship. And I had been a lawyer for 7 years because when I got out of law school, I worked at a museum. I didn't go right into the law. And so I said, I've only been a lawyer 7 years. He gave me a piece of advice that I will never forget. He said, don't self-check. He said, let them tell you no, you never tell yourself no.
Mm.
And that has been with me. Um, we all have that imposter syndrome in some ways bred into us. You
Yes.
know, um, I think in the Black community, especially, that am I really qualified for this? Am I as smart as, this person or that person? I had been a lawyer for a judge for 7 years, and I was getting ready to quit because I felt I couldn't keep up. The writing was so intense, so much writing, even with students, interns and all, just couldn't keep up. So I went to Judge Lewis and I told him I was going to have to step down. And he said, why? I said, I can't keep up with the writing.
Mm.
He said, what do you mean you can't keep up with the writing? I said, well, the guidelines say we have to write findings on every case that we, special care and protections that we resolve. He said, you've been writing findings on every case that came before you that you resolved? I said, yes. He said, Leslie, that's impossible. You write findings on those cases that are being appealed, but you don't bury yourself in an impossible task.
Yeah.
He told me, he said, you are as qualified, as smart, and as capable as any judge sitting in this court.
Mm.
And you are needed here. He says that you're not going anyplace. And I haven't forgotten that. We argued a lot, but he was a mentor. He was encouraging. He was one of those people who didn't want to let you fail. you know. Now, we ruled very differently on a lot of criminal cases, set bail very differently, because he was setting bail from his life experience. And I was setting bail from my life experience.
Wow.
And that's why he said I was important, because it impacted him. He was the boss, but he considered me one of the leaders of his court.
Wow. So
You know,
can you I have three questions. One is really a two-part question. How do you define leadership with all your experience and all of the models of leadership you've seen and all that you've done for others who are leaders now? How do you define leadership?
leading by example, I guess, is the shortest, clearest statement I could make.
Mm.
Leading by example and never forgetting to pull those who are with you along with you.
Mm.
I think being example, for instance, I said court starts at 9 o'clock. I've got to be there before 9 o'clock, so that those people, and I wanted us to be examples to the kids coming into our court. to the parents coming into our court that when they got there, the judge was already here. You know, when they got there, their lawyer was there.
Mm.
And I tried to tell them about, kids. And I said, you look at these kids, school attendance, how many days they're absent and how many days they're tardy. Well, I said, nobody's teaching them to be on time. I said, so we have to.
Mm.
And we have to do it partly by example and by holding them accountable. And I would tell kids, you can't be late to my court. I did not invite you here. But if you're going to be here, you're going to be on time.
Mm.
And I learned to temper that as I went through the years. I got embarrassed a couple of times. I had an elderly woman and her grandson come into court and they were late. And I'm getting on him, why are you late? And she said, Judge, it's not his fault. She said, I just couldn't walk that fast and I had to keep sitting and I made him late and I'm sorry. I said, ma'am, you don't have to be sorry. You're here with them. But it was an education for me.
Yeah.
And then I sat out in Orange, Massachusetts, or Greenfield, or one of those Western towns. The young man came to court very late. I said, why are you late?
Mm.
Police officer said, Judge, I can explain. I said, you can explain why he's late? He said, yes, Judge. He lives in another town in a trailer home out in the woods.
Mm.
They don't have a car. There's no public transportation between their town and here. And if I didn't bring him, he couldn't be here. He couldn't get here. If I don't take him home, he has no way to get home.
Mm.
So I said, oh, now look at it was one of those lousy cases that shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Mm.
I said, this kid has been here 5 times on this case. I said, he's been more than punished.
Yeah.
I said, I'm dismissing this case. And I turned to the DA. I said, I hope you don't object, but I'm dismissing this case. The DA said, Judge, it's never going anyplace. I said, yeah, but yet we had took this police officer out of he was supposed to be going home and going to bed because he worked overnight, but he had to go pick up this kid. And so, yeah, we learn as we grow, and I learned as a judge not to assume that everybody has the same opportunities that I had, even though we had limited opportunity. There are people who had a lot less. So
Yeah. And so leadership is a learning. It's really just learning. And
yeah,
when you can lead,
constant learning.
yes,
Even
exactly.
when you know all of the subject matter,
Yeah.
how you apply that subject matter in every situation can be different.
Mm-hmm.
And how you bring other people along who you want to become invested in what you're doing. A good leader makes everyone want to do their job well,
Yeah.
and they do that by watching how you do yours and by how you treat people.
Mm-hmm.
So I always wanted to treat one of our secretaries got in trouble. They fired her and they told us we couldn't speak to her. I said, whoa, I don't do my friends like that. She had become a friend.
Yeah.
I said, I don't dismiss my friends because they're in trouble and because I'm a judge. And so we're still friends. I'm still her mentor. I still write letters for jobs, and she's done well in life. You know, she got caught up behind her brother creating a bad situation. Not something that she consciously did, but it cost her because of who her family was. And
Mm.
I felt you don't destroy her because of who her brother is.
Yeah.
In that case, my brother, 2 younger brothers especially, would have gotten me in a world of trouble. And so I think that good leaders um, are people who get admired.
Yeah.
People see who good leaders, and you can tell who the good leaders are when you walk in a building. Even the janitor know who they are,
Yeah.
but they know who the janitor is also.
Yeah.
You know,
I love that. I love that. So leaders learn, and by learning, they grow, and by growing, they demonstrate. And by demonstrating, they inspire. And by inspiring, they lead by example and build future leaders who can follow that same pattern.
Wonderful how you you encapsulated that, put it together.
You taught me well. You taught me well, Judge. So,
I've never considered myself a leader. Okay. I've always considered myself an active person, um, active in the community. But there have been very few organizations that I was the leader of. I was a worker bee, and I enjoyed being a worker bee. I've been the chairman of a few things, but not always because I wanted to, and so I think it's important that we recognize that you can lead from the rear.
and you know what? You're leading from the back, but if you just turn around, you'll realize a lot of people are following you.
Yep.
So, and I think the best leaders, they don't need the titles, they don't need the positions, they don't even need the accolades. It's just their lives are inspirations for someone else. And I think I not think I know I've experienced how your life has been of influence to me personally, and to all these people who are just showering you with praise on social media because of who you are and what they've meant to you and the example that you've demonstrated for them. And it really raises the bar. So my final two questions is, given all that you know and all that you've seen and how you define leadership, what is your commentary on leadership now, especially given the year we've had 2020, the year we're having now, with all of these crises? What is your
I've
commentary?
seen some wonderful leaders out there,
Mhm.
people who um, you wouldn't expect to be leaders in some cases, community folks who've stepped up, who are leading again by example, who
Mhm.
are not looking for the applause and the pat on the back, but are trying to make a difference in their community. And my son is right there,
Okay,
I
that's
tell him, be quiet, be quiet. um, but it's, there are those elected leaders, but they're not always the leaders.
yeah.
Sometimes they're the figurehead. There are people who go out and work for the betterment of other people every day, nurses, doctors, lawyers, police officers. As much as I am at war with the police, I know some wonderful police officers.
Yeah.
I know folks who have given of themselves above and beyond the call of duty. One of my heroes is my big brother. I saw him give a lady a ticket one time. He is so polite that she said thank you,
Mm.
because that's what he brings out of people,
Hmm.
and I said, that's who I want to be, that even in a bad situation, people know that you care. I had a young man that I had to sentence to 5 to 7 years in prison, a juvenile, 15 years old, being sentenced to 5 to 7 years in prison. And I looked at the case, but this was an agreement between the lawyers. Him and the co-defendant were both getting the same sentence, even though he was less culpable than the co-defendant. The co-defendant wasn't in front of me, just him. And I looked at this child's life, because you're reading about him and all. I said, that's not who this kid is. So once the case was over, I went back to lockup to sit and talk with him. And I told him, you don't have to let this define you for the rest of your life.
Mm.
I said, you need to treat this as a bump, serious bump, but a bump in your life. It's not who you were before this incident, and it's not who you should be after this.
Yeah.
It's not who your mother sees, and it's not who you see when you look in the mirror. A few months later, he wrote to me and thanked me. He said I was going to lift weights and get myself ready for the adult jail and prison. He said, but what you said to me made me want to finish my education
Mm.
because that's who I was.
Mm.
He said, so I started working on my GED.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And I wrote back to him how proud I was of him for that. And then he wrote me again, let me know he got his GED and that he wanted to take courses at BU in the prison. But that because he had a 5 to 7 year sentence, he couldn't. If he had had a lesser sentence, he could have taken the courses. And he said, so I'm asking to come back in the court to be resentenced. He said, but I know I can't come in front of you because we've had ex parte communication.
Oh, that's great.
So I didn't write him again because, he was right.
Yeah.
Just so happened I was the duty attorney in the criminal session when he was brought in. And I told the DA about our interaction.
Mm.
And she said, Judge, I don't object to you hearing the case. I said, whoa, you want to go call somebody? She said, no, Judge, I know you'll be fair. And so I changed his 5 to 7 to a 4 to 6,
Wow.
which made all the difference in the world to him and didn't cost the court very much.
Mm.
Her boss came to see me, and said, I'm not sure that I wouldn't have objected to this. He said, but we're not going to object to it. We're not going to appeal it. He said, we'll see how it turns out. Well, the young man sent me pictures of him in talking in front of a group of young folks. He didn't show the young folks, just himself. He said, I'm trying to pay it forward. And I think that's an important word that I've had twice in my life from young people, saying they're paying it forward because of something I did for them. I tried it when I was retired. I tried to find him to get him to invite him to my retirement party.
Mm.
I couldn't find him, but I'm sure he did okay because he ended up taking courses at BU, and I know he was a bright enough and capable enough young man to finish college and not to let this negative situation define him for the rest of his life.
Mm.
I would go up to Norfolk Prison and work with the men up there, and they had a group called Second Thoughts that worked with young men from the community. These were men who grew up in the same situation that young people are in now, and they wanted to talk to them about their lives. And they made a difference to so many young men. And when I say I'm a crybaby, one of the young men that I cared about, who I made go up there because he wasn't going to go, but I made him go. I said, if you don't go there, I'm going to have to commit you. He said, oh, I'll go. He loved it. He was the first one there every Thursday night to go up. Well, I wasn't at Dorchester Court one time. Another judge said he had done something silly. He committed it. The young man was held for a little while. He came out, came right up to the court because he wanted to make sure that he was on the list to go back up to Norfolk Prison to Second Thoughts. And he met with his probation officer, left the court, was a block and a half from the court when he was shot and killed.
Oh, God. Oh.
Yeah. And again, probation officer cried, the lawyer cried, and the judge cried because we cared about this child. And we saw the growth that he was making in his life. We saw the difference that this program was making for this young man. And it hurt us that we lost him, and so I say it all the time. You never know what your words are going to do to another person's life, whether they're harsh or encouraging. And never hurt somebody you don't have to hurt.
Yeah. So I'll end with this question because this is where you're leading. What do you hope people say about your contributions to humanity
And
and
cared about people.
that you cared about people? And this interview for me is just, again, a real privilege and honor because your care for people, number one, is the first C of leadership that I talk about, but it's evident. Even if you didn't say that, it was evident. And you made room for me. You've made room for countless others. And I would say the world is certainly better that you are in it. And I am grateful for you. You continue to be one of the people I talk about all the time. Thank you so much. Thank you
See,
so much.
that's what you want people to do without cursing.
Yes, yes,
Talk about you
yes.
without cursing, then you
Without
know.
cursing.